July 18, 1944, the Bergabus Ridge, south of Caen, Normandy. The mist does not burn off gently this morning. It clings to the hedgerows like smoke from a fire not yet started. Sergeant Dale Wilson of the 2nd Armored Division, Hell on Wheels, has his head out of the turret of his M4 Sherman. He calls it Bouncing Betty. The name is a joke, a dark one, because Shermans bounce. They bounce right off German armor. His crew is tired, 3 weeks since the breakout, and the fighting has been a rhythm of hedgerow village hedgerow. They've grown confident. The Panzer IVs and even the older Tigers have been dealt with by numbers, 5 Shermans for every German tank, swarming like wolves. Then they hear it. A sound unlike the high-pitched whine of a Panzer, a deep, straining groan, diesel. Heavy labored. Through the mist, a shape. Wilson squints. He's seen Tigers before, the round, bulky silhouette, the boxy hull. This is different. This is larger. The turret is not rounded but angular, sloping sharply back like a giant steel cowl. The gun, it looks like a telephone pole. The 88mm KW K-43, longer than any gun they've ever seen on a tank. The hull is massive, a looming fortress of interleaved wheels and thick, sloped armor painted in dark yellow and green camouflage. Wilson freezes. He doesn't shout a command. He just stares. The King Tiger, Tiger II, has not seen them yet. Its engine groans as it struggles through the soft Norman mud, throwing up clods of earth. It is slow, deliberate, confident. Wilson drops into the turret. His voice is calm, but the words carry a chill that has nothing to do with the morning air. Gunners, he whispers, target, 10 o'clock, looks like a Tiger, a big one. The gunner, a kid from Ohio named Richie, peers through the sight. He sees it. His hands tremble slightly on the elevation wheel. Jesus, Sarge, that's no Tiger. The turret of the German beast begins to turn, slowly, inexorably, toward them. The crew of Bouncing Betty is about to learn the difference between fighting a war machine and fighting a monster. To understand the shock, one must first understand the machine that carried America to the doorstep of the Third Reich, the M4 Sherman. By July 1944, it was not just a tank. It was a promise written in steel and stamped on assembly lines across the American Midwest. The Sherman was born from necessity and a specific philosophy of war. In 1940, after the fall of France, the U.S. Army realized its armored force was obsolete. The M3 lay with its sponson-mounted gun was a stopgap, a coffin on treads. American industry needed a design that could be built fast, shipped across the Atlantic, and operated by boys who, 6 months prior, had been driving tractors or delivering mail. The M4 was that design. Its genesis lay in simplicity. The Wright Continental radial engine, originally designed for aircraft, was crammed into the rear. The transmission sat in the front, creating a distinctive tall silhouette, but allowing for easier maintenance. The suspension was sturdy, the tracks reliable. But its core philosophy was not to win a one-on-one duel. It was to be good enough. Good enough to support infantry, good enough to exploit breakthroughs, good enough to be everywhere at once. By June 1944, the Allies had landed over 150,000 vehicles in Normandy. Thousands were Shermans. They came in variants: the M4A1 with its cast hull, the M4A3 with its welded hull, the Firefly with its cumbersome 17-pounder gun, but the vast majority carried the 75mm M3 gun, a weapon designed in 1941, a weapon that could handle Panzer III or early Panzer IV with ease. The crews loved them, not because they were invincible, but because they started every time. The Sherman was a soldier's tank, forgiving, familiar, and available in the desert. Against the Italians and the Afrika Korps, it had proven itself. In Italy, through the mountains, it had ground forward. By July 1944, American armored divisions were confident. They had heard rumors of heavier German tanks, the Panther, the Tiger, but doctrine said speed, numbers, combined arms. If a Sherman couldn't kill a heavy tank from the front, it would flank it. If it couldn't flank it, artillery would suppress it. If artillery failed, the fighter-bombers would destroy it. It was a system of war, efficient, brutal, American. But that system was about to collide with a different kind of war, a war built on a single Terrifying idea that one machine, one crew, one gun could hold an entire army at bay. The crews of those Shermans, men like Sergeant Wilson, had never seen a king tiger. They didn't know that the rules of the game had just changed. They didn't know that the mechanical heart of their reliable workhorse was about to face a cold, calculating predator designed for one purpose only: to kill them. And as the mist lifted over the Norman fields, that predator was waking up. While Detroit stamped out Shermans like loaves of bread, the factories of the Third Reich were engaged in a different kind of labor. They were building cathedrals of steel. Slow, expensive, reverent. The Tiger II was not born from a philosophy of victory through numbers. It was born from desperation and the German romance with the wonder weapon. The Wunderwaffe. By 1943, after Stalingrad and Kursk, the Wehrmacht was bleeding white. The strategic initiative had shifted to the Soviets in the East and the Americans in the West. Germany needed a miracle, and miracles, they believed, came in the form of 88 millimeters of rifled steel. Development of the Tiger II began in 1943, a rushed attempt to combine the thick, vertical armor of the Tiger I with the sloped armor philosophy of the Panther. The result was a machine that weighed nearly 70 tons, twice the weight of a Sherman. It was designated Panzerkampfwagen VI Osf B, but the world would come to know it by simpler, more fearful name, King Tiger. The design was a study in contradictions. The hull, built by Henschel, used sloped armor that was elegant in its efficiency, 150 millimeters thick at the front, angled to deflect incoming rounds. The turret went through two designs: the early production model, often mistakenly called the Porsche turret due to its origin with the Krupp design for the Porsche prototype, had a curved front that created a shot trap. Later models received the production turret, a flat, 180 millimeter thick slab of steel that made the front of the turret virtually impenetrable. At its heart sat the gun, the 8.8 cm KWK-43L71. This was not the same 88 that had terrorized the deserts of North Africa. This was a longer, more powerful beast, over 6.5 meters long, with a muzzle velocity that could send a shell through the armor of any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2 kilometers. In testing, the gun could achieve a 100% first-round hit probability on a 2-meter-high target at 1,000 meters. At 2,000 meters, the probability still hovered near 90%. The optics were Zeiss. The crew were elites, often veterans pulled from the Eastern Front, men who had learned to fight while outnumbered and surrounded. But there was a price for this perfection. The King Tiger was a mechanical tragedy waiting to happen. Its Maybach HL 230 P30 engine, producing just 700 horsepower, was the same power plant used in the much lighter Panther. It was woefully underpowered. For a 70-ton monster, the transmission and final drives, never designed for such strain, failed regularly. The interleaved road wheels, while providing a smooth ride, trapped mud and ice, freezing solid in cold weather. Fuel consumption was catastrophic. A King Tiger guzzled nearly 10 gallons per mile on cross-country terrain. Its operational range was barely 75 kilometers off-road. By the time these beasts reached the front lines in Normandy, many had already broken down on the rail journey from Germany. Those that arrived intact faced another enemy: the narrow, sunken lanes of the French countryside, which offered little room for their massive hulls to maneuver or traverse their turrets. Only 492 King Tigers were ever built. In the same period, American factories produced over 40,000 Shermans. The German High Command did not see this disparity as a weakness. They believed in quality. They believed that one King Tiger, dug in on a ridge with its gun facing west, could stop a battalion. They believed that the sight of this monster, its armor impervious, its gun devastating, would break the morale of the American tankers. They were about to find out if that belief was true. As the summer of 1944 burned across Normandy, the roads leading to the front carried two different machines toward each other. From the west came the Shermans, reliable, numerous, crewed by boys who had never known defeat. From the east came the King Tigers, rare, fragile, crewed by men who had learned that defeat was always won. Breakdown aways. And on a damp morning near the Burguebus Ridge, they met. Inside bouncing Betty, the world compresses. The turret, always cramped, feels like. Coffin Richie the gunner has his eye pressed to the periscope. The King Tiger fills the lens. It is still moving, still unaware, but it is turning. Sarge, it's turning toward us. Wilson doesn't respond. He's doing the math in his head. Range, 800 meters. Angle, slight oblique. Armor penetration of his 75mm gun at that range. Approximately 60 millimeters. Frontal armor of the King Tiger, 150 millimeters sloped. The math is simple. They cannot penetrate, not from the front, not from the side at this angle, maybe from the rear, maybe. Reverse now. The Sherman's transmission groans, 5 miles per hour in reverse, the King Tiger's turret continues its slow traverse. The German gunner has not found them yet, but he will. Then the King Tiger stops. Its engine note changes, a deep, labored idle. The gun locks onto a point in space, not them, something else, a column of Shermans from another company moving along a sunken road, 800 meters to the east. The first shot is not loud. It is a crack, a whip, a hammer strike on a steel drum a mile away. The round travels so fast the eye cannot follow it. It strikes the lead Sherman. Standard M4 square in the turret ring. The Sherman explodes, not burns, explodes. The turret lifts, spins, and crashes down into the road. The hull vomits black smoke and orange flame. Richie stops breathing. Wilson watches the fire. 3 seconds, that's all it took. 3 seconds from target acquisition to annihilation. The King Tiger's gun shifts, searching, hungry. The engagement near Burgoabus that morning was not a battle, it was an execution. The King Tiger, commanded by an experienced Feldwebel from the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion, had chosen its position with the cunning of a sniper. It sat hull down behind it. Low ridge, only its turret exposed. The massive 88mm gun had a clear field of fire across 2 kilometers of open farmland. The American doctrine of swarming relied on mobility. Shermans could flank, could use speed to find weak spots, but here there was no flank. The ground to the left was soft, boggy, the kind of mud that swallowed 70-ton tanks, let alone 30-ton Shermans. The ground to the right was a village, held by German infantry with Panzerfaust. The King Tiger had created an invisible wall. Any Sherman that crested the ridge would die. Any Sherman that tried to go around would die slower, but just as surely. The American company commander, a lieutenant fresh from Fort Knox, ordered smoke. White phosphorus rounds popped, creating a screen. Under cover of the smoke, 3 Shermans advanced, hoping to close the distance to where their guns might have a chance. The King Tiger didn't need to see them. It knew the terrain. It knew where they would emerge. When the first Sherman broke through the smoke, the 88 was already waiting. The round struck the driver's visor. The Sherman jerked, slewed sideways, and brewed up. The second Sherman reversed back into the smoke. The third tried to flank left, toward the bog. The King Tiger traversed slowly, majestically, and fired again. At 1,000 meters, the round struck the Sherman's engine deck. The tank lurched forward, then died, smoke pouring from every hatch. 3 tanks, 3 shots, less than 4 minutes. The King Tiger had not moved. Its engine was off. Its crew was calm. They had done this before on the Eastern Front, against T-34s that came in waves. The Sherman was just another target. Inside the surviving American tanks, the radios crackled with confusion. What was that? How did it kill 3 tanks without even maneuvering? The word spread through the battalion net, a new word, a word that carried the weight of fear. King Tiger. Inside the King Tiger, the world looked different. Literally, the German gunner peered through a Zeiss TZF-9B binocular sight, optics so clear, so finely ground that the American tank seemed close enough to touch. At 1,000 meters, the sight revealed every weld seam, every track link, every crew member's head protruding from a turret. The Sherman's periscope was adequate, functional, but it was a mass-produced instrument, ground to a tolerance that was good enough. At the ranges, the King Tiger fought 1,200, 1,500, even 2,000 meters. The American gunner often couldn't identify the target, let alone hit it. He saw a shape, a blur. Muzzle flash, then nothing. This was the technological chasm that separated the two machines. the King Tiger was. Built by master craftsmen, working with high-quality steels alloyed with molybdenum and vanadium, rare metals that Germany scavenged from occupied territories. The armor was face-hardened, designed to shatter incoming projectiles before they could penetrate. The Sherman's armor was homogeneous steel, softer, more ductile, easier to weld, easier to produce in quantity, but less effective at stopping high-velocity rounds. And yet, the King Tiger carried the seeds of its own destruction within every component. The final drive, a complex set of gears that transferred power from the transmission to the sprockets, was notoriously fragile. It had been designed for a 40-ton tank then, adapted for a 70-ton beast without adequate reinforcement on the roads of Normandy, where every hill strained the engine and every turn twisted the drivetrain. King Tigers broke down with grim regularity, the maintenance crews struggling to recover these monsters with inadequately powered half-tracks often had to abandon them. A 1945 Newsweek survey noted that during the Battle of the Bulge, countless incidents illustrated the inferiority of our Sherman tanks to German machines, but the same report acknowledged that the King Tiger's mechanical fragility meant many never reached the battlefield at all. The Sherman, by contrast, was a marvel of industrial common sense. Its right Continental engine, though underpowered by German standards, was reliable. Its transmission, designed by men who understood that tanks would be driven by 18-year-olds with minimal training, was forgiving. When a Sherman broke, it was fixed often within hours, using spare parts that arrived by the crate load from depots. In Normandy, when a King Tiger broke, it died, slowly, expensively, permanently. The men inside the King Tiger were not ordinary soldiers. They were the remnants of a dying aristocracy of arms, the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion, which fielded the first King Tigers in Normandy, was composed of veterans, men who had fought in Russia, who had seen entire companies of T-34s burn before their guns. They knew their machines' strengths and its weaknesses. They knew that the King Tiger was a sledgehammer, not rapier. They positioned it on high ground in defilade, where its gun could reach out and its armor could shrug off return fire. They never moved unless they had to. The American crews were different. They were replacements, farm boys, factory workers, students. Their average age was 22. Their training had been rushed. Their experience minimal, but they possessed something the Germans, for all their skill, lacked: adaptability. When the King Tiger appeared, the American tankers did not panic, not for long. They radioed for help. They called in artillery. They marked the German position on their maps and reported it to battalion. Within hours, the word spread: there's a King Tiger near Burgaibus. Stay away from the ridge. Use the villages. Call in the fighter bombers. The German crew, for all its elite training, was trapped by its own doctrine. The King Tiger was supposed to operate as a mobile fortress, shifting position to meet threats. But in the close, constricted terrain of the Normandy bocage, mobility was a luxury. The beast could not turn quickly, could not reverse through hedgerows, could not cross bridges rated for 40 tons. It sat and waited and killed. But while it killed, the Americans learned. The German commander, watching through his Zeiss optics, saw the Shermans pull back. He saw smoke. He saw infantry deploying. He knew what was coming. He could not stop it. He could only wait for the rocket-firing Typhoons to appear overhead, or for the 90mm guns of the tank destroyers to find a flank. In that waiting, the battle was already decided. The King Tiger was a weapon of shock. The Sherman was a weapon of attrition, and attrition in the summer of 1944 was a game the Americans could not lose. July 18, 1944, east of Cagney, Operation Goodwood. The morning had begun with hope. 1,500 bombers of the Royal Air Force had turned the sky black, dropping thousands of tons of high explosives on German positions along the Burgaibus Ridge. The earth trembled for miles. The men of the British 11th Armored Division, crammed into their Shermans, believed they were witnessing the end of the German army in Normandy. By mid-morning, the armored columns were rolling south. 3 divisions, the 11th, the Guards, the 7th, pushing toward the ridge. The Shermans moved in waves, kicking up dust, engines straining. It was the largest concentration of British armor since the desert wore nearly 800 tanks. They did not know what waited for them on the reverse slope of that ridge. The 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion had arrived in Normandy only days earlier, their king. Tigers, 12 of them, fresh from the factory, were dug in along the ridgeline hull. Down turrets barely visible above the crest, the crews had spent the night camouflaging. Their positions cutting branches, draping netting. By dawn, they were invisible. The German commander, Oberleutnant Richard Freiherr von Rosen, was 22 years old. He had fought in Russia. He had seen T-34s come in waves. He knew what was coming. He waited. At 11:00 hours, the first British tanks crested a low rise 2 kilometers north of the ridge. Von Rosen watched through his binoculars, Shermans, dozens of them, spreading out across the wheat fields like toys on a carpet. He gave the order to hold fire. Let them come closer, let them commit. The British advanced. At 1100 meters, the leading Shermans began engaging. German outposts, machine gun nests, a few half-tracks. They did not see the king. Tigers they did not know. At 800 meters, von Rosen spoke one word into his radio, Panzer Marsch. The first round from the 503rd, King Tigers struck a Sherman of the 2nd Fife and Forfar. Yeomanry, the tank was moving at speed when the 88mm shell punched through its turret face. The round, traveling at over 1,000 meters per second, did not just penetrate, it disassembled the tank from the inside. The turret blew off. The hull erupted. Behind it, a second Sherman brewed up, then a third. The British tankers had trained to fight Panzer IVs, maybe Panthers. They had never seen anything like this. Rounds that should have penetrated at this range simply bounced. One Sherman gunner fired 3 rounds at a King Tiger's frontal armor. He watched each one ricochet into the sky like skipping stones. The King Tiger did not even traverse toward him. It ignored him. It was engaging other targets. The radio nets dissolved into chaos. Call signs went silent. Smoke rose from a dozen burning hulls. The survivors reversed, seeking cover, but there was none. The wheat fields offered no concealment. The King Tigers sat on the ridge like gods, untouchable, selecting targets at their leisure. On the British right flank, a troop of 3 Shermans attempted to maneuver around the German position, seeking a side shot. They found a sunken lane and followed it south, hoping to emerge behind the ridge. They did not know that a King Tiger from the 1st Company had repositioned during the night, covering exactly that approach. The lead Sherman cleared the lane's end. The King Tiger fired from 150 meters. The round struck the driver's hatch. The Sherman stopped, slewed, and burned. The second Sherman reversed into the lane, but the King Tiger had already traversed. Its second shot hit the turret ring. The tank's commander, a lieutenant from Liverpool, was blown clear of the turret. He survived. His crew did not. The third Sherman brewed up, trying to reverse through a hedgerow. In less than 30 minutes, the 11th Armored Division had lost over 40 tanks. The attack had stalled. The Burgabus Ridge, which Montgomery had promised would fall by nightfall, remained firmly in German hands. But the King Tigers had a problem. They had not moved. They had not needed to. But now the British artillery was finding the range. 25-pounder shells began falling around the German positions, not direct hits. The King Tigers could survive that, but near misses that stripped away camouflage, that forced crews to button up, that reminded them they were not alone. And in the smoke and chaos, something else was happening. The British were learning. Radio operators passed coordinates, spotters marked positions, and deep behind the lines at a forward airfield near Caen, the rocket-firing Typhoons were warming up. The King Tigers had won the first round, but the battle was far from over. The King Tigers had won the morning, but victory in the armored duel, as the Germans were learning, no longer guaranteed victory on the battlefield. The British did not withdraw, they adapted. At 14:00 hours, the first wave of Hawker Typhoons appeared over the Burgabus Ridge. They came in low, throttled back, their distinctive chin radiators gaping like open mouths. Each aircraft carried 8 RP-3 rockets under its wings, 60-pound high explosive warheads that could penetrate the top armor of any tank if they struck true. The German crews heard them before they saw them, a deep, growling rumble that swelled into a roar, Then the first typhoon dropped its nose and dove. The pilot, a 22-year-old New Zealander named James Stellan, had been flying ground attack missions since D-Day. He knew the risks. The King Tigers were ringed with 20mm flak guns, and the German infantry had scattered machine guns through the hedgerows, but he also knew that below him, British tankers were dying. He lined up on the lead King Tiger, the same beast that had destroyed 3 Shermans. That morning, the range closed, 800 meters, 600, 400, at 300 meters, he pulled the trigger. The 8 rockets left the rails with a whoosh and a cloud of white smoke. They streaked toward the German monster in a shallow arc. 2 struck the hull, 1 hit the turret roof. The rest exploded around the tank in a curtain of steel and flame. The King Tiger shuddered, smoke poured from every hatch, but when the dust cleared, it began to move. The rockets had not penetrated, they had stunned but not killed. Stellan pulled up, banked hard, and came around for another pass. This time, the flak found him. A 20mm shell punched through his radiator, the temperature gauge spiked. The engine began to lose power. He would not make it back to base, but he would not die alone. The typhoons could not always kill the King Tigers from the air, but they could do something almost as valuable. They could stop them from moving. As the rocket-firing aircraft screamed overhead, the German crews buttoned up tight. Hatches sealed, periscopes turned skyward. They could not see the ground around them. They could not see the Shermans massing in the villages to the north. And while they looked up, the British artillery found its mark. The 25-pounders had been registering targets all morning, now with forward observers. Calling in corrections, the shells began to land with precision, not on the King Tigers themselves. That would have been a waste, but around them, behind them, on the roads they needed to retreat. High explosive rounds churned the ground into moonscape, creating craters that the 70-ton monsters could not cross. Fragmentation shells scythed through the supporting infantry, forcing the grenadiers to pull back. Smoke rounds blinded the German gunners, turning their perfect fields of fire into gray, swirling fog. The King Tigers were now isolated. Their kills that morning had bought them space, but that space was shrinking. Von Rosen, the German commander, recognized the danger. His tanks were static. Targets die. He ordered a withdrawal, not a retreat, but a repositioning. The King Tigers would fall back to a secondary line, rearm, refuel, and resume the fight. But the King Tigers could not withdraw, not quickly. As the first tank engaged its transmission and tried to reverse off the ridge, there was a grinding noise from the final drive. Metal sheared against metal. The tank lurched, stopped, and would not move again. The interleaved road wheels, packed with the chalky mud of the ridge, had frozen solid. The transmission, never designed for the strain of 70 tons, had finally given out. The crew scrambled out, grabbing their personal weapons, and ran for the rear. They left their invincible tanks sitting on the ridge like a beached whale. A second King Tiger managed to reverse 100 meters before its engine overheated. Steam billowed from the exhaust louvers. The crew, fearing a fire, bailaid out. They tried to restart it later. They never could. By nightfall of the 12 King Tigers that had begun the day on Burguebus Ridge, only 5 were still operational. 3 had been abandoned. 4 had been knocked out, not by Shermans, but by mechanical failure, by mud, by the sheer impossibility of moving a 70-ton monster through the close, wet terrain of Normandy. The Shermans did not kill the King Tigers that day, but they had won, not through superior firepower, not through better armor, but through the simple, brutal arithmetic of attrition. The British had lost over 200 tanks in Operation Goodwood. Many of their crews were dead or captured, but by nightfall on July 18th, the Burguebus Ridge was still in German hands, but barely, and the King Tigers that remained were out of fuel, low on ammunition, and surrounded by enemies they could not see. The hunters had become the hunted. In the days that followed, the pattern repeated across Normandy. King Tigers would appear, kill a handful of Shermans, and then break down or run out of fuel. The American and British crews learned to avoid frontal attacks, to call in air support, to use artillery to suppress and isolate. They learned that the monster could be killed, not by single heroic shot, but by 1,000 small cuts. And the German crews learned something too. They learned that they're magnificent. Machines, for all their killing power, could not win the war. They could only delay the inevitable. The sun set over Burgabus Ridge on July 18, 1944, and the battlefield fell into an uneasy silence. The crump of distant artillery continued through the night, but the armored duel was over. In the morning, the casualty collectors would begin their grim work. The numbers told a story that neither side fully understood at the time. The British 11th Armored Division had lost more than 200 tanks in operation. Goodwood over 40 of them in the first 30 minutes of the King Tiger engagement. Hundreds of crewmen were dead, wounded, or captured. The wheat fields east of Cagney were littered with burning hulls, the twisted remains of Shermans that had crested the ridge and met the 88mm guns of the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion. But the Germans had also paid a price. Of the 12 King Tigers that had begun the day, only 5 remained operational by nightfall. 3 had been abandoned, not destroyed by enemy fire, but simply left. Where they broke down, their final drives shredded, their engines seized, their transmissions ground into scrap by the strain of 70 tons of steel struggling through mud. 4 had been knocked out, not by Shermans, but by the cumulative effect of mechanical failure, immobilization, and subsequent destruction by artillery or air attack. The 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion would report 500 enemy tank kills over 4 months of operations in Normandy and on the Eastern Front, but those kills came at a cost the German High Command could not sustain. For every King Tiger that fought, 2 were in the repair shops. For everyone that reached the battlefield, a dozen were stranded on rail cars, unable to move because the bridges couldn't bear their weight or the roads couldn't accommodate their widths. The arithmetic was brutal and inescapable. American factories produced more than 48,000 Shermans during the war. German industry managed just 492 King Tigers. For every King Tiger that rolled off the assembly line, nearly 100 Shermans left American factories. For every German tank crew that mastered the complexities of the King Tiger's Maybach engine, 100 American boys learned to drive a Sherman in a matter of weeks. The Allies could afford to lose tanks, the Germans could not. But that cold arithmetic offered little comfort to the men who had faced the King Tiger. That morning, Sergeant Dale Wilson, whose tank Bouncing Betty had survived the ambush by reversing into a sunken lane, watched the recovery teams pull bodies from the burned-out Shermans. He had lost friends, boys he had trained with, boys who had laughed at the nickname Ronson, who had believed that numbers would always triumph over quality. They had been right, but being right did not bring them home. In the days that followed, a bitter joke spread through the American armored divisions. A tanker's prayer, "Please God, don't let me die in a Sherman." It was dark humor, the kind that men tell when they have seen too much and understood too clearly the odds they faced. General Omar Bradley, commanding the American forces in Normandy, would later admit the truth that every tanker already knew: our Shermans were never a match for the Panthers and Tigers. But he also noted the brutal reality of industrial warfare, that American superiority in numbers enabled them to surround the enemy in battle and knock his tanks out from their thinly armored flanks. He acknowledged quietly that this willingness to expend Shermans offered little comfort to the crews who were forced to extend themselves as well. The King Tiger had proven its lethality, but it had also proven something else. Something the German High Command refused to accept. Perfection in modern war is a luxury, mass is a necessity. And the Allies had mass. The shock of the King Tiger encounter rippled through the Allied command structure. Like a wave, in London and Washington, intelligence officers poured over after action reports trying to understand the new threat. In the field, crews modified their tactics, their equipment, their very psychology. The most immediate response was tactical, the old doctrine of swarming German. Heavy tanks with mass Shermans had proven too costly. New orders filtered down from division headquarters: do not engage King Tigers frontally, ever. If you encounter a Tiger II, your first action is not to fire, it is to call for support. Tank destroyer battalions, equipped with M10 Wolverines and M18 Hellcats, were pushed forward. These lightly armored but fast vehicles carried 76mm or 90mm guns that stood a better chance of penetrating King Tiger armor if they could get to the side or rear. The doctrine shifted from seek, strike, destroy to ambush, flank, and run. Hit the monster from the side, then use speed to escape before it can traverse its turret. The infantry learned new tricks too. Bazooka teams were trained to target the King Tiger's tracks and running gear. If you can't kill it, immobilize it. A stationary tiger is a target. A moving tiger is a nightmare. The 2nd Armored Division began attaching infantry squads to tank platoons specifically to deal with the threat of German heavy armor. The infantry would suppress supporting German infantry while the tanks maneuvered. Air support became the primary anti-tank weapon. By late July 1944, every armored advance in Normandy was preceded by a call for cab rank, rocket-firing Typhoons, and P Thunderbolts stacked overhead, waiting for targets. The fighter bombers could not always penetrate King Tiger armor, but they could drive the crews inside, blind them with smoke and force them to button up, and sometimes, when a rocket struck the engine deck or the turret roof, they could kill. On the technological front, the encounter accelerated programs already in motion. The M26 Pershing, a heavy tank designed to match the Panther and Tiger, had been in development since 1942. Now it became a priority. The first Pershings would not reach Europe until February 1945, too late for Normandy, but their development was a direct response to the German heavy tank program. The 76mm gun Shermans, M4A176 and M4A376, were rushed to the front. In greater numbers, these tanks carried a higher velocity gun that could penetrate a King Tiger's side armor at reasonable ranges and, under ideal conditions, its frontal armor at point-blank range, but the crews knew the truth. The 76 was still outmatched. By the 88, it was a stopgap, not a solution. The British took a different approach. They had already developed the 17-pounder gun, a weapon powerful enough to kill a King Tiger from the front under the right conditions. The Sherman Firefly, a Sherman modified to carry the 17-pounder, became a priority target for German gunners. The Firefly crews knew this. They painted their gun barrels with distinctive white stripes to identify each other, and they learned to hide their long guns in the center of armored columns, letting the standard Shermans draw fire while they maneuvered for the killing shot. But perhaps the most significant shift was psychological. The myth of the King Tigers invincibility had been broken. The men who had survived the first encounters, men like Sergeant Wilson, like the tankers of the 11th Armored, spread the word. The monster could be killed. It broke down. It ran out of fuel. It got stuck in mud. It was terrifying, yes. But it was not invincible. The German crews, for their part, knew the truth. Their magnificent machines were dying not gloriously in battle, but ignominiously by the roadside, abandoned by crews who could not repair them, stripped by other Germans for spare parts, destroyed by their own engineers to prevent capture. By September 1944, as the Allies raced across France toward the German border, the King Tigers had become a rarity. The 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion, decimated by mechanical attrition and air attack, was pulled from the line to refit. They would return, fight again, lose more tanks to breakdowns than to enemy fire. The pattern never challenged. The Shermans kept coming, thousands of them, relentless, unstoppable. The King Tiger was never meant to win a war. It was meant to lose one slowly. In the cold light of history, that is the tragedy of German armored engineering in the Second World War. The men who designed the Tiger II were not fools. They were brilliant engineers who understood metallurgy, ballistics, and mechanical design at a level that surpassed their American counterparts. They built a machine that could, in ideal conditions, destroy any Allied tank at ranges where retaliation was impossible. But they built it for a war that no longer existed. The King Tiger was a dueling weapon. It was designed for the set-piece battle, the open plain, the long-range engagement, where skill and technology could decide the outcome. It was designed for a war of maneuver, of decisive armored thrusts, of elite crews fighting elite machines. By the summer of 1944, that war was over. The battlefield was no longer the north. African desert or the Russian steppe, it was the hedgerows of Normandy, the narrow streets of French villages, the muddy fields of a continent being liberated by an army of factory workers and farmers. The King Tiger could kill 10 Shermans, 20, perhaps even 50, but for every king Tiger that fought, 100 Shermans were crossing the Atlantic for every German crew that mastered the intricacies of the Maybach engine, 1,000 American boys learned to drive a Sherman in a Kansas wheat field. The German quest for perfection was, in the end, a form of surrender. It was an admission that they could not win a war of production, a war of attrition, a war of democratic mobilization, so they built wonders instead. They built cathedrals of steel. That could not be moved, could not be repaired, could not be sustained. The Sherman, by contrast, was not a wonder. It was a tool. It was reliable, replaceable, and ruthlessly efficient at the only thing that mattered in modern industrial warfare. Being there in numbers so vast that the enemy could never kill them all. The crews who faced the King Tiger that July morning learned a lesson that no training manual could teach. They learned that fear is real, that technology can terrify, that single monster on a ridge can stop an army in its tracks. But they also learned something else. They learned that monsters can be starved, they can be isolated, they can be outflanked, and when they break down, as they always do, they can be destroyed by the very boys they were meant to terrify. The King Tiger was the last roar of a dying empire, beautiful, terrifying, and utterly feudal. The Sherman was the future, not because it was better, but because it was enough, and in war, as in so much else, enough is everything.